Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. And it's July 3rd, which means tomorrow is July 4th, which also means Thanksgiving is coming. So I'm with Amy Dong and our journey to get here. And before I want to do a little bit of my Johnny Carson monologue, how I met Amy. And I'm going to keep showing you all 21 Years Young, her book of essays, which I'm reading, so you can see the bookmark. And I got notes but there's so much I want to say. I met Amy a couple of weeks ago, and a couple of messages, and then we did a Zoom, and several times doing that first initial Zoom, I grabbed my head. I said, whoa, wait a second. You're 22 years old? How can that be? And before we went on the air, I paid a tremendous compliment to Amy. It wasn't a backdoor compliment, but it was, I always thought I had this great advantage on all these Gen Zs and millennials and Gen X's, because I'm a septuagenarian, and with that comes the obvious, I have so much life experience, who can touch me? And then I bump into Amy Dong, who at 22 has a inordinate amount of life experiences and has written this book of essays about her life and her journey, and looking at some of it's poignant, and it's raw, and it's real, and it's honest. And I started off our chat this morning, Amy, by saying I have to pay you another a compliment. And I'm not Ernest Hemingway sitting here, but you are a real writer. So the fact that we're together, and the powers that be of social media brought us together, which I love, and we planned this this time that we're going to spend together is also such a resounding, resonating message to your fellow generation. Mm-hmm. To go listen and watch and read and learn from you. Go to your website, amy-dong.com, and experience what you experienced. You are a wonderful writer, and you had me thoroughly engrossed. So that is my Johnny Carson monologue, and we're gonna now explore your world.
Sounds great.
Take it away, Amy. How about a little bit of a little bio, and then we'll kind of do some stuff.
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Calvin, for having me on your show. It's been wonderful to get to know you over the past few weeks. And yeah, we had a nice heart-to-heart before this chat. So it feels like I'm just talking to an old friend. But to people who don't know me, hi, I'm Amy. I'm 22 years old, and I'm a Fulbright Scholar, an author, and a writer. And now, most recently, a life coach, because I just started a personal project that is called The Life Project, and it's a mentoring program for young adults by young adults about everything regarding life. So I'm going to back up a bit and say why I ended up writing this book. And it's because I've always been very fascinated with the ideas of failure, the idea of why we do things, and the ideas that Viktor Frankl puts in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which are, what is the way to a meaningful life? How do we find purpose? And what are we willing to suffer for? What are we willing to sacrifice? And in my book, I threw a series of essays around traveling, around mental health issues, and around just going to school like a normal college student. What are these issues that young people grapple with, and how is it that we make choices in such an uncertain period in our lives? Because I'm only 22 years old, but I have read many books from people who are older than I am, people who are younger than I am, and it seems like the 20s are a period of tumultuous change And it's a period where we have the most choices and also the least, the not that many ideas about where we should actually go. So it's very much a random process whereby we end up living life, and in that way we live the questions, we live through the answers, and we learn from mistakes, and we grow from our accomplishments. And that's what I'm fascinated with in my life. I hope that my purpose is to help other young people find their purpose, and through a book, through my life project, through spending the last year in Taiwan teaching English as a Fulbright Scholar, all of these little experiences are shaping me to become that teacher, that educator, and that continuous writer that I want to be growing up.
Which is a good segue. What does it mean to you to grow up?
Growing up, I think, is a very bittersweet process. For me, it's recognizing your limits. There was a book that I read a couple years ago that defined maturity as the recognizing of your own limits, but accepting them for what they are and growing within them. And I think that's very beautiful, because when we're young, we're always told that the world is our oyster and we can do anything we want to do. But the older we get, the more we realize that, one, isn't really true, isn't very realistic, but two, that there is so much beauty in that, because a lot of authors over the years would argue that life is essentially meaningless. It's been so hard for us to find scientific meaning in our lives, but the beauty in that is that if everything is meaningless, then we have the responsibility and the privilege as humans to discover our own meaning. And it's anything as simple as writing a poem about a rock that you see outside because you decide to give importance to that rock and you want to write about it. Or it's choosing the circle of friends that you have because those people enrich your lives and you hope to enrich theirs. So growing up is truly recognizing your limits, but realizing those limits are beautiful, and that they force you to make choices and they force you to understand what you actually value, as opposed to the 7 billion other people in this world.
You know, it's funny. I'm completely on the other end of the age spectrum. We are diametrically opposed. And I could probably write an essay on the joys of what I'm doing as a retired person, and all the opportunities. But what would you say are the joys of being young?
The biggest joy of being young is the ability to be idealistic and very optimistic about anything in the future. There is a certain excitement and joy of realizing that there are still so many untrodden paths in your future, and you could be going on any single one of them. At the same time, I find a lot of comfort and relief in your words and saying that, when you're in your 70s, there's still many joys, and you could write an essay about that right now. And that to me is another sign of growing up and another sign of hopefully maturity. It's where you realize that every stage in life has its joys. When you're young, it's being able to see this unlimited future. But when you're older, you can look back and say, I've already lived a very full life, and there are now smaller things that I value a lot. And Atul Gawande puts it very beautifully in his book, Being Mortal, but it's not really about age that really defines what is important to us. It's perspective. So if you're someone who undergoes a near-death experience, you suddenly realize that there are small, mundane things in your everyday life that you took for granted and that are now the most important things in your life. Or if you are older and you've narrowed down your circle of friends, you've narrowed down your focus on perhaps one passion project like you have with podcasting and journaling and getting to meet all these wonderful people, that becomes your biggest joy. And I think the goal is to enjoy and to acknowledge the moments of happiness within each stage that we have, or at least that's my hope. I'm not I'm not anywhere near your age yet, but I
Yeah,
hope
but
to one day be.
guess what? You
And I hope
nailed
to
it.
one day feel
You
like
nailed
that.
it. You really did nail it. I've said it a bunch of times to you. It's like I pinch myself and I say, come on, Calvin. I mean, I did teach a couple of years ago at Rutgers, so I certainly have interacted. I've mentored students for the last 5 or 6 years, up to 14 a semester. So I've really interacted. And you know what? Talking to you and looking back, you got you're part of quite a generation, and despite maybe what pop culture would say, you guys are pretty well grounded. Maybe my generation helped force you to be that, and maybe in our inadequacies, we've forced you to be even more grounded than you are, which is a little bit of a segue. What would you say in your 2+ decades are some of the failures you've gone through that others might kind of learn from?
Yeah, quite a few. um, and yes, I think we have a lot to learn from the older generation. And I would like to argue that the older generation has some things to learn from us too. We're not all empty-headed TikTokers, but some failures. I would say that in my life, I've had two very big failures that I now no longer see as failure, or there are failures that I appreciate. The first one was the classic college application process. My older sister was studying at Harvard at the time. I'm from a family of Chinese immigrants, and in my mind, I had done everything right. I had sort of ticked all the check boxes, but when it was my turn to apply for colleges, first of all, no one at the age of 18 truly knows what college they want to go to. They don't know what they want to do. And if there's an 18-year-old that comes to me and says they know exactly what they want to do with their lives, I will say that they are a liar. Because there's just too much uncertainty and there's too much to learn in the early 20s to make that true and for the rest of your life. But I was rejected from almost every single college that I applied to, including all the Ivies, or I was put on Columbia's special wait list 3 different times. And in the end, I was just like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go to a school that I applied to on a whim, didn't really do any research on. It was my father's suggestion, actually, because he was like, I think, this might be a good school for you. You're a city person. And I ended up at NYU. And I say ended up because at the time I was very devastated. I thought I really felt like a failure. I let my parents down. I let my sister down. I let my community down. And I thought I had just committed the biggest blunder of my life. Of course, hindsight being 2020, I look back at my last few years in college and I'm just so grateful that I ended up there, and that I chose the school and that the school chose me, because if I had not gone to NYU, I would not have traveled to 25 countries in just around a year. I would not have been able to really understand what it means to live in the heart of New York City, which is many people's dreams. And it was a very humbling moment where I realized, one, no one cares about you as much as you think they do. So when I thought that I had let a lot of people down, in the end, no one cared except for myself. No one cares after you go to college where you ended up going to college, unless they want to go to the same college and they're asking for advice. And number two, failures are so important and essential for discovering who you are and discovering self-confidence and a groundedness that doesn't lead to arrogance, but in fact is more saying, I can handle whatever life throws at me. And it's no longer a cliche because I've lived it. And it's now my cliche to hold and to honor. And the second failure, beyond just not being accepted to colleges, was a more serious one for me, which I write about in the first chapter of this first essay of this book, which is my struggle to take care of myself. And in my sophomore year of college, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and I was told that I was lucky to be alive, because my heart rate was a 39. I had starved myself for 3 years and was so good at being in denial because I'm a type A neurotic planner that I just didn't even realize that I was quite literally killing myself. And I remember sitting in my room the day of my diagnosis when the physician told me, "You can't go back to school, or I believe you're going to have a heart attack and not be able to come home." I sat there just feeling so embarrassed and guilty and angry and very bitter that I was being taken off the path that I thought I was supposed to go on, which was to finish college and be forced to be at home and be forced to reckon with, Amy, if you really only did have one more month to live, what would you want to do? What
Wow.
would you want to live for? What
Wow.
would you want to be remembered for? And it was another one of those failures in which I was really taken by the shoulders. Someone was shaking me and saying, Amy, life is short and you never know what will happen. So you really need to figure out how you want to leave your mark, but also how you want to live and not care about what anyone else says or what anyone else expects of you. And I say those were two failures, but now when I talk about them, I would say they're just two of the most transformational moments in my life that gave me the courage and the confidence and the willingness to take risks to go on life's next adventure, because I'll never know when it will be my last.
Mhm. Do you, this is a little off topic, but not really. I look at you from my spiritual side
Hmm.
because I had mentioned I'm kind of rather spiritual, which is propelling me to finish my second book. But do you feel that this experience at being at the precipice, actually, of your existence, and the ultimate resolution of this, actually was a gift that somebody up there gifted you with this experience, uh, uh, taking you right to the edge and bringing you back and refocusing you. So, do you ever think of it as a gift? I guess you do.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And Calvin, I feel like you're reading my mind because my whole life I've been agnostic. I really respect people who have faith because I think it's just something that grounds you, and it's basically an acceptance of the unknown and a belief in it. And I think that's so beautiful. And there's a part of me that really wants to find that faith for me. And I haven't found it yet, but I do believe there is something out there, or there's something to believe in. And recently I've actually been dabbling with a lot of Buddhist principles and mindsets. I think it's very powerful for mindfulness and appreciating the idea of unattachment, but unattachment being truly an acceptance of everything as it is in the present, and not being swayed by ideas in the past or the future. And for me, part of me does feel like it is a gift. It's a gift to be able to recover from something so serious and realize the gravity of the situation, and then go forth and live every day with more appreciation for the mundane things. Like I remember going back to college after I spent a semester back home in the hospital and in my physician's office being like, wow, I'm actually sitting in a classroom, or wow, I can walk through Washington Square Park and not fear that I'm going to have a heart attack. And just those small details made me so happy. And people always say like, oh, how do you find happiness? How do you find happiness? You don't find it. Part of you has to create it in small moments and find that gratitude. And the other part is just recognizing that happiness is an activity. It's a constant struggle for doing what you think will bring you meaning and bring you joy. And happiness, ironically and paradoxically, requires a lot of suffering. And that's what I experienced. And it's something I tell my friends this who ask me what it's been like. And I say, I would never wish an eating disorder. I would never wish anxiety or depression on someone else. But if you have it and you are willing to struggle with it and understand it, there is a certain beauty that comes with that people who don't struggle with mental health disorders may never understand.
No, I listen, learn from you, observe you. In my world, you were gifted. And the funny thing is, when you're gifted, and I say from we know not from whom or what. And actually, when we go off the air, I'm going to treat you to something I don't treat a lot of people to. How I discovered a gift. It was a writing gift. I'll show you. But anyway, you're so grounded, and I'm glad you thought I was kind of reading your mind, because in our friendship, my knowing you, I think you were given a wonderful gift for a wonderful purpose, and part of that purpose is what you're doing now, and your wonderful journey ahead of you. So there's a reason for you. Anyway, this is all heavy stuff, but I'll try to lighten it a little bit. But anyway, next, what would you say in your 22 years? I love saying that, your 22 years. Is your proudest accomplishment so far? I would assume maybe that, because that is huge.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think this is my biggest accomplishment, mostly because I grew up loving, actually, I did not grow up loving writing. I grew up being scared of writing because my first language was Chinese in the household and my English was not great growing up. But then I met these wonderful English teachers in middle and high school who taught me how to write, and more importantly, how to think about writing. Not just memorizing a 5-paragraph structure, but saying like, what do you want to convey, and just write it. And journaling for me has always been a form of therapy. I filled up like 13 journals so far of just
Wow.
random ramblings about my life. And a lot of people ask me what gave me the inspiration to write a book. And I say it was never one moment. It was more just looking at that stack of journals, recognizing that writing is not just important, but necessary for me to have some sanity, to say, okay, well, if this is necessary for me to have sanity, maybe it will be just the most beautiful journey to put it all down in a more coherent way so that I can share my stories for anyone else who might just accidentally listen and realize that it's important for them too. And for me, storytelling is just so powerful because it's hard to relate sometimes to statistics or to generalizations, but if you read someone's story about maybe his arguments with his dad, or he was a caregiver for his mom, or a girl who has a fear of heights, these are all little moments that we can insert our own stories into, and we become those characters, we become the narrator. And my hope with this was that it's, first of all, it was for me, for my sanity, but beyond that, it is for someone else to maybe see themselves in my first chapter and recognize, oh my gosh, I feel like I've been struggling with something like this for years and I just never knew how to put it. And actually, after I published this book, there were quite a few young women who came forward to me, either through recognizing me from high school or being dance friends with me from when I was a child, and saying, Amy, I must confess, I have an eating disorder and I just didn't know who else to talk to about it. But now that I know you've gone through the same thing,
Wow.
what should I do? And one of those friends of mine, who was one of my mentees in high school, she's now in an inpatient hospital program where she lives, and she's struggling a lot, but she's also telling me that the program is saving her life and giving her something to look forward to. And those are the more moments where I'm like, I'm so happy I wrote this book.
Okay. Off topic, I'm gonna throw in one of my Calvin questions. I always like to ask this. So, excluding family or friends, or somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
That is such a good question.
It could be a couple of answers. There's no rules here.
I would love to spend a day with one, David Foster Wallace, because he
Figured
is,
that.
another way you've read my mind. I feel like I've had this answer in the back of my mind for years and very few people ask me, but I'm like, just someone ask me. But mostly because I would describe him as a very insane person. Insane in the way where he was just so brilliant. Some people just couldn't understand him. And insane to the point where he felt like the only way out was suicide.
Yeah.
And someone so tortured, but also so brilliant. And can really capture the essence of what it means to be alive through books like Infinite Jest, or essays like Consider the Lobster, where he talks about, lobsters have feelings too. Why are we doing this? I would love to sit with him and ask him, why did you feel like this was the only way out? Or just what made you, what were the pivotal moments that made you have these brilliant catharses about your essays? Like, why did you write about this and not this? And I think hearing from him would give me a lot more perspective on how I want to treat my own mental health struggles and how I want to see my own purpose in life. And a second person I would love to eat or dine with or talk with is Rainier Rilke, the German poet, because he is someone who I aspire to be like in a spiritual sense. He really has this love for his God in a way that is not at all condescending or aggressive to people without faith. And he writes it so beautifully in his poems. And one of my favorite quotes from him that I used actually in my epigraph of the book is, live questions as they are now, and live the questions as if they are locked rooms that you are struggling to find the key to. And one day you will live yourself into the answer. One day you will discover those keys without even looking for them. And I think it's a form of therapy for me, because I'm, again, neurotic. I try to plan for the future, but again, planning is everything, but plans are nothing, because they almost always fall through. So he gives me a lot of hope in that way. And I want to fangirl over his poetry because he's a very, very beautiful writer.
Great answers. It's funny, you and I a little bit alike, because if you had asked me that, on top of my list would have been Ernest Hemingway.
Ah, fascinating.
Because
Yes.
he exited by himself too with a shotgun. David Foster Wallace, 46 years young, beyond brilliant. Ernest Hemingway, also a young guy, tortured but brilliant. He's one of my literary heroes. Anyway, moving on, because we can go off on all these tangential roads. I'd like to know, because you're a writer, what do you do? I would really like to know this, underlining the word really 3 or 4 times. I'd really like to know what you do when you have writer's block, because I get it all the time.
Yeah, I actually just answered that question on my Goodreads profile, because some random reader was like, what do you do when you have writer's block? And the answer I give is I read a lot, because writing is totally an act of creative borrowing. I won't say plagiarism, but you really have to be well read to be well written. And that is because you learn the types of writing that you love yourself, so you know what you want to write like. And I won't say that I want to be Joan Didion, for example, but I will want to say I want to be the Amy Dong version of these essayists that I aspire to. And just in the past week, I think I've read three books, and I'm now on my fourth for a book club that I'm attending later this week with some NYU alumni. And it's about artificial friends who discover what does it mean to love when they observe humans just in their everyday lives. So biggest answer is read. It's kind of unsatisfactory because when you're reading, you are not actively doing the work that you need to get done. But I'm a writer where inspiration, it's like a little nugget that comes out of nowhere. And I'm like, I need to grab onto that. And those nuggets happen more and more the more I read. And when I'm falling asleep one night, I'll just be like, oh my gosh, I have the idea for like that first line in my next essay. But very, very rarely do those just come when I'm sitting there and trying to let these thoughts percolate on their own. I have to get it from somewhere. So yeah, reading would be my biggest suggestion. And then the second piece of advice is know the kind of writer you are. My publisher actually laid this out very well for me. And he was like, if you are an episodic writer, then you are someone who writes in bits and chunks. If you are a deadline writer, then you can't get any writing done unless someone sets a deadline in front of you because you are a procrastinator. But it's that pressure and that stress that drives you to produce beautiful work. And then there are some who are everyday writers where they have to write 500 words a day, no matter how good they are, they just have to write it down.
Interesting. Let's go back to reaching out to Gen Z, who I'd love armies of Gen Z people to see this interview, because I think it can really help them. What advice would you give to young people who are trying to find a pathway in their life?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's one that I always ask myself too. I first have to caveat by saying I would almost say there are two types of ways you can think about it. One is if you are taking care of family and you need financial security, because as much as we don't like to talk about it, it's still essential. And I always think you cannot be poor and live in America and be very happy, because there are just a lot of inequities in our systems that really don't allow for poverty to do well, people in poverty to do well. So one, if you are in need of financial security, just get a job. Get any job where you are learning and you're making money to pay the bills. But our generation, Gen Z, I think is also defined by a relative level of stability, whether that's provided for our parents or otherwise, where we have the privilege and the luxury to find meaningful work, not just work, but work that actually fulfills the soul. And for people who have that luxury, then I would say it is your responsibility, and it is the excitement of trying different things until you find something that you feel like you are willing to suffer and sacrifice for. It's a kind of a dark way of putting it, but in Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, he says, happiness, again, is not an end destination. You do not feel happiness when you finally buy that car, or it's like a fleeting feeling. It's more of the daily bits of happiness you get from doing something worth doing. And I would say to do that, you have to take risks. You have to go on a whim and quit that job to start working at a startup that you think is really important. Or it's don't be a sheep. Don't follow everyone else in finance or consulting just because that looks like the right thing to do. I'm kind of I also can't say I know everything I'm doing right now. I'm in a bind because I realized I don't want to work in finance or consulting anymore. And I just came back from a Fulbright scholarship in Taiwan, and I'm a writer, and my trifecta is being a motivational speaker, a teacher, and a writer. Like those are the three things that give me a lot of meaning, which is why I've started the Life Project, which is why I actually this past week took on a part-time role as an author coach for my publisher. And now I have like 3 jobs. And I want to quit my main one, but I still need to pay the bills. But it's just the constant juggling of priorities. And the last thing I would say is don't be afraid to say yes. You always want to say yes to as many things as possible and then say no to the things that you can no longer take on, as opposed to not taking on anything and potentially regretting skipping over an opportunity.
That's a great line. Don't be afraid to say yes. That's kind of heavy. I like that. I gotta file that up here. Um, I don't know if we touched on this, but how do you personally find this elusive thing called happiness? What are some of the things that make you happy?
Well, some of the things that make me happy are petrichor. It's my favorite word. It's the smell of the ground right after rain, fresh rain.
Wow, I never knew that had a word.
Yeah, when I found it, that also gave me happiness because my sense of smell is my strongest sense. And I like when I'm unhappy, sometimes I just go up to my bedroom and smell my blanket for 5 minutes because it just gives me a lot of calm. I'm kind of weird. Other things that make me happy, reading a good line in a book. There are all these like small things that you have to be aware of. And for me, happiness is telling myself, Amy, you are very lucky. You should be very grateful for what you have. So in a day, like what are the things that made you smile? And I actually just finished this journal, but I had a 5-year memory journal where there was one line a day for 5 years. And every single day, I would just write down 5 things that made me happy that day.
Wow,
And it was
wow,
that mindfulness of gratitude that actually gave me true happiness. So I also read this recently. There's a really well-studied psychologist. I forget what university she teaches at, but there's this concept of synthetic happiness that only humans are capable of conjuring, which is when things aren't going great, we are still able to find pockets of things that make us feel like we still want to be alive. And in the end, those moments of synthetic happiness turn into genuine joy. And that is what I want to carry it forward. I no longer have this grandiose vision of this dream job will give me happiness every day for the rest of my life, because that just isn't true. And there are always shitty days in every job. But it really is the cliche where things are found in the little moments. And maybe part of the reason why I'm ascribing more and more towards Buddhism is because I feel like a lot of Buddhist tenets are, recognizing those little moments and just cherishing them for what they are in that moment.
great stuff. Really great stuff for people to listen and to learn from. And I sit and I listen to you. The happiness thing, what you said during my day. I extract some minute, irrelevant, distant little particulates of something that made me happy. And I actually feed off that.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of energizes me. Even while I'm sitting here talking to you, my mind wanders. My mind wanders and shoots around, and I accept it, and I find things that and so while I'm actually sitting here interviewing you, my mind is, not that I'm not paying attention, because I am to every word you're saying, but the little things come and shoot me and get me like energized and happy, if that makes sense. So you've already touched on the career stuff that you want to do, the writing and your mentoring and uh, this comes from you. It's a great question. If I like it, I may actually plagiarize it one day.
Go for it.
I will go for it. But if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Yes, one of my favorite questions, because usually I think most people just say fly or teleport, which would all be awesome. But whenever I ask my friends this, I tell them it has to be something weird that you don't think anyone else has ever said before. So mine would be if I could touch someone and like just poke them or touch them right here near the heart, I could instantly make them feel warm and fuzzy inside. And I also sort of creatively plagiarized this from I don't know if you've ever watched The Voice or America's Got Talent or any of those shows where there are all these inspirational people with kind of um, very sad but beautiful backstories. There was also the same thing in China for a couple of years, and there's this little boy who went on stage, and the judges asked him, like, what is your dream? And he said his dream was if he could have a green. He wanted this ink that if he dropped it and spilled it on the ground, it would turn the whole world green, because he was from the Mongolian grasslands and he was sad to see that a lot of the grasslands were being taken away, and he had lost his mother at a really young age, and he found a lot of comfort in beautiful grass. So he said, if I drop it on the ground, I just want the world to turn green. For me, I was like, if I just touch someone, I want them to feel warm and fuzzy inside. And I'm very selfish. My superpower wouldn't be if I snapped my fingers, everyone would instantly just be happy. It was like, I have to be the one to initiate that contact, because I want to feel like I had some sort of connection with this person before I just shared that. But the point of my wanting that power is mostly because when I am around warm and fuzzy and happy people, there is just very little conflict, and people are willing to listen to each other. There would not really be war anymore. That's like very, very dramatic, but I feel like when people feel warm and fuzzy inside, they really do appreciate the little things, and everyone is just happy around them. So it's like a little ripple effect.
It's funny, if you had asked me that, I'm sitting here asking you that, and I was wondering if I could have a superpower, and I think about it all the time, it would be to install myself back to the first day of my freshman year in college. And
Wow.
yeah, and let me go and redo the college experience, not necessarily promising that I would take the stuff I learned and try to make it a better experience. Not that it was bad, but I would love to go back to freshman year. Um,
I love that. It's like a reset at a specific point in time where
yeah,
you are touching the most. Wow. That
yeah,
one's great. I like that. I like that.
good. I'm by the way, I'm semi-possessed thinking about that, and I can't tell you how many times a week I go to my little picture file from my days before I went to Rutgers. I was out at the University of Toledo,
Hmm.
in Ohio for 2 years, and it was the first time I was ever away from home, ever. That
Wow.
I was the umbilical cord was very much alive and well with me and my mother, and I'd never been separated from my mother. So being at college for the first time was an oh wow.
Hmm.
And I had 2 wonderful years, and then I was mature enough, like you, I was mature enough to know that I'm having too much of a good time, and I need to become a pharmacist. So I needed to transfer to Rutgers, which had a great pharmacy school, and I gave up that wonderful life, um, to live at home, actually sleep on a sofa, because my parents had moved to a small apartment. I had 2 sisters. There was no room
Hmm.
for me. They didn't expect me to come home. So for a couple of years, I slept on a sofa in the living. Anyway, I don't want to talk about myself. Um, any kind of fun facts about you that we should know as we kind of wind down?
My biggest fun fact is that I love ducks. They're my favorite animals.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
And
that.
I have many, many duck stuffed animals. Another fun fact is that I go to Dave and Buster's every year for my birthday because I love arcade games. One day I'm gonna have my wedding there, so my future boyfriend, future husband better be prepared for it, because I need a Dave and Buster's wedding. Um, and a third fun fact, what would it be? Maybe that I tell people apart by their smells. If you blindfolded me and just put up a bunch of my friends' t-shirts, I'd be able to tell which shirts they belong to, because
Wow.
my sense of smell is just that important to me.
Wow.
So yeah, it's great. It's kind of a double-edged sword though, because if I'm ever walking in New York and I go by a dumpster truck or something unpleasant, it's just infinitely worse for me.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that folks they'll see it on the bottom of the screen, amy-dong.com. It's quite an interesting website, and I again, I love that little, there's a lot of sections there, but I love what you're reading, because since we're hoping that there are armies of Gen Z people out there, that they could see what you're such a great representative of your generation. What you're reading, maybe they should read. It's, suggested reading for the summer kind of thing. So people should definitely go to a very wonderful website. I call it as I see it. I guess the last thing to talk about is where do you see yourself in 10 years? The looking glass.
Hopefully, I am in a high school or in a university teaching something I love teaching, whether that be public speaking or creative writing, or negotiations. I don't know. Teaching something that is about connecting with other humans, whether that be through writing or through speaking with them. That's the goal. Although I definitely have no idea where I'll be in 10 years. Maybe I'll be living in another country once again. But in 10 years, also, I hopefully have a family, because that's something that's super important to me. And I've been raised by two wonderful parents, and I really do owe them everything. And I kind of want to do the same for my future family. So those are the two big aspirations. And maybe the third one is working on my second book, or perhaps third, depending on how ambitious I am.
Okay. By the way, are you heading down a road? In other words, would you ever head down the road of fiction? Are there things inside you, fiction-wise?
I've always been scared of fiction because I need boundaries for me to be realistic. I think fiction works well when you can still make people feel like they can relate and they can understand. And sometimes when I write fiction, it just goes way off the walls into the nether worlds.
Okay.
But the older I get, the more I'm like, maybe with more experience, I could see myself doing fiction. But for now, what I know and what I love is essay writing. It's very specific, but it's like little snippets of nonfiction that can open up something super unique and individual and make it universal. So that's still where my interests and my curiosities lie for now.
Okay. By the way, ladies and gentlemen out there, this is so good that sometimes when I was reading it, sometimes I said to myself, this is like fiction. I mean, could this stuff really happen? The robbery stuff. I mean, come on, how could that happen?
I wish that were fiction too.
It was so descriptive and so real and so raw, as a reviewer said. This is just great reading, and this is just a great, perfect time to do a wrap. That's a term. By the way, to screenwriters out there, take a peek at this. Really, this should be what a great film that would make, in my estimation. So, March July 4th, I wish you a wonderful, happy, great weekend. I cannot thank you enough for your time and your graciousness, your energy, your spirit, your story. I'm so thrilled we met. officially inviting you back anytime you want to come back and talk about anything, because you're a speaker. You can bring a bunch of people back with you, whatever. I'm here. I'm
Thank you
here.
so much.
I probably won't change my hat, but I'm here.
I love it. No, keep the hat. And I want to thank you so much for really starting our friendship and for reaching out to me and giving me the trust that I would provide some kind of helpful content for your podcast. But it's been a pleasure. And I'm going to go on with the rest of my day just with a lot of happiness.
Me too. Me too. This was great. So thank you so much, Amy, and to be continued.
Thank you.
Be well.